Welcome directly into today's deep dive, everyone. We are thrilled to have you here with us. So I want you to imagine, if you will, being completely trapped in this magical radioactive wasteland.
Sounds like a terrible vacation, honestly.
Right, like the
Yeah.
worst imaginable. And you are being hunted day and night by an immortal sorceress and her literal undead generals.
Just a completely unwinnable scenario.
Exactly, and your allies. Totally untrustworthy. The local flora and fauna are actively trying to consume you, and your only hope for survival, the only thing standing between you and absolute annihilation, is the scattered stack of mysterious anonymous letters.
Yeah, which is just wild.
It is because, what do these letters actually detail? It's not like a schematic for some magical superweapon.
Oh, no, it's the daily life of a bumbling, overweight antique dealer from decades ago.
Yes. So today, we are plunging headfirst into this incredibly dense, layered narrative of Glen Cook's source material, The White Rose, from the Black Company Chronicles.
It's such a brilliant piece of work because it forces us to, examine survival from two vastly different vantage points simultaneously.
Right.
We're unpacking the bizarre, deadly ecology of the plane of fear, the agonizing pursuit of forbidden history, and the terrifying power of true names.
Which is just a massive topic. But we really need to establish the framing here because the narrative structure is, well, it's so unique.
It's essentially two timelines running at once.
Exactly. We are riding alongside Croaker, who is the physician and the analyst of this mercenary group, the Black Company. He's trying to survive in the present, but simultaneously we're basically looking over his shoulder as he reads these smuggle letters, and these letters chronicle the past exploits of wizards and watchmen near the graves of ancient evils.
And, why should you, the listener, care about this? I mean, beyond it just being a fascinating story.
Yeah, what's the hook for us today?
Because this is an absolute masterclass in how buried history simply refuses to stay dead.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about how institutions completely forget their original purpose over time, and how possessing the right information, like a single true name, can literally topple empires.
It's so relevant. So let's jump right into the first major setting. Since we all know the desperate situation the company is in hiding from the Ladies' Empire, we don't need to rehash the basic geography of their retreat.
Right, they're in the plane of fear.
Yes. And we know Darling is the tactical linchpin, but okay, let's unpack this. We need to look closer at the actual tactical reality of using the plane of fear as a defensive bunker.
It's basically a suicide mission that just happens to be slightly better than the alternative.
Right. Because Darling's presence generates this null zone, right? It's a localized area where magic simply ceases to function.
Which is massive in this universe.
Totally. But that geographic shield isn't just like a passive wall. It's the only reason the company can endure a landscape that actively hates them.
And the plane of fear is a masterclass in hostile world building. Because the threat is entirely ecological. It's not political.
Yeah.
The Lady and the Taken, they operate on this paradigm of just overwhelming magical supremacy. They conquer through sorcery.
But when they try to project that power into the plane,
They hit Darling's null zone.
Yeah.
Exactly. And their flying carpets literally lose their metaphysical buoyancy and just crash.
boom, right into the dirt.
Their offensive spell constructs instantly dissipate into raw, inert energy. They are suddenly reduced to just regular foot soldiers.
Which levels the playing field for the mercenaries. But for the company, surviving the plane requires navigating an ecology that has evolved specifically in the absence of structured magic.
Right, relying instead on raw, predatory biology
Hmm.
and just this latent, ancient weirdness.
Yeah, the weirdness is off the charts. Like, let's talk about the specific flora and fauna detailed in the text.
Oh, the menhirs.
The menhirs. These aren't just spooky set dressing. We are talking about sentient stones. They are, what, 10 to 15 feet tall?
Yeah, acting as a literal early warning system.
They just pop out of the ground, deliver these incredibly sarcastic, ominous warnings like, there are strangers on the plane, and then they just vanish.
It's so unsettling.
It really is. And I've always wondered about the functional mechanism there. Are they communicating through seismic vibrations, a shared root system?
Well, the text kind of suggests a deeply rooted, almost telepathic interconnectedness, and it's likely anchored by the old father tree.
Oh, man. The old father tree.
Yeah. The menhirs are basically the sensory organs of the plane. They detect the intrusion of mass or specific magical resonance.
And then the old father tree is what? The central nervous system.
Exactly. It's planted at the geographical center. It's described as 20 feet tall and 10 feet thick, and it just radiates this palpable dread.
And its leaves chime, right, like wind chimes.
Continuously.
Yeah.
And that sound seems to coordinate the aggression of the local flora. It's not just a random collection of monsters. It is a unified defensive organism.
Wow. So the mobile territorial walking trees aren't just out hunting for food.
No, they're acting like white blood cells swarming an infection.
That is a terrifying analogy, but it gets worse because it's one thing to have the ground trying to kill you. The sky above the plane is arguably a worse nightmare.
The aerial threats are they're insane.
We have the wind whales and the mantis. Now, the obvious question is, if Darling's null zone cancels magic, how do floating creatures the size of small cities stay aloft?
That is precisely the genius of the plane's defense mechanism.
Yeah.
The wind whales and mantis do not rely on sorcery. Their abilities are entirely biological. Hyper-evolved, sure, but biological.
Okay, so a wind whale, which is stretching up to 500 yards long.
Which is it's unfathomable how big that is.
It's like a flying aircraft carrier. It likely utilizes biological gas bladders for buoyancy, similar to a zeppelin, right?
Exactly. They just drift through the sky, dragging these massive glowing tentacles. They're apex predators operating on physical laws, not magical ones.
So when they enter the null zone
They don't crash like the ladies' carpets. They just keep hunting.
and sharing that airspace, you have the mantis. Giant flying rays with 100-foot wingspans.
And they shoot actual lightning.
Yes, not spell-casted lightning, but organic. I mean, think about it like hiding in a highly radioactive exclusion zone. You are safe from human armies because no one in their right mind wants to go there,
Right.
but you are constantly at the mercy of the mutated horrors that call it home. The plane uses the company as a lure to ground the Empire's forces, and the company gets a moat filled with lightning-breathing monsters.
A Croaker knows this is completely unsustainable.
Of course, you can't live in a radioactive zone forever without the radiation catching you. Or, a wind whale tentacle.
Darling's geographic shield is just a stopgap. To actually survive, they need the ultimate exploit.
Which brings us to why Croaker is obsessively reading the annals of a dead antique dealer. He's looking for a historical trump card, a lockpick.
He is searching for the root vulnerability, and this shifts our focus to the historical timeline, away from the visceral survival of the plane to the agonizing, meticulous obsession of Bomanz.
Yes, Bomanz. Let's get into him.
Bomanz is such a fascinating study in contradiction.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he seems so incredibly mundane.
Deliberately so. He purposefully isolates himself in this squalid, impoverished village bordering the old forest, directly adjacent to the Barrowland.
Where the Dominator and the Taken are buried.
Exactly. And his public persona is painstakingly constructed. He's this henpecked, overweight merchant dealing in antiquities.
By day, he's just selling dug-up weapons to traders like Tokar. He spends his days arguing with his wife, Jasmine.
Over, household funds.
Yeah, and fending off Menfu, this petty local rival trying to steal rusty breastplates from his excavation sites.
But the domestic squalor is highly calculated camouflage. It gives him the perfect, boring excuse to handle Barrowland artifacts without drawing the attention of the Empire or the Eternal Guard.
Because at night, Bomanz drops the act entirely. He is a master wizard, a historical cryptographer of the highest order.
He isn't just digging up rusty spears. He's mapping the spiritual architecture of the Dominator's prison.
What's fascinating here is his methodology. He's not just a grave robber.
No, not at all. He isn't using brute force. He is reverse engineering the magical containment vessel. Just consider the silk map he hides inside the fake spear shaft.
Oh, the map is incredible. Describe the layout from the text.
The geometry he charts is highly specific. You have an outer circle acting as a perimeter boundary, encompassing a 5-pointed star. Within the star, a pentagon.
And at the absolute center.
The Great Barrow. This is sacred geometry weaponized for containment.
And he maps out the specific graves of the original, taken at the points of the star, right?
Yeah, he locates Shapeshifter, Bone Asher, Stormbringer. He identifies the patrol routes of the ghost soldiers and the exact resting place of the sleeping dragon guarding the inner crypt.
I really want to challenge Bomanz's motives here. The text presents him as this intellectual obsessive. He spends years deciphering dead, forbidden languages like Telekur and Uchitel.
Risking execution if he's discovered, by the way.
Right. And he claims he wants to, quote, nurse sweet milk from the blackest of cows. He wants to communicate with the lady to extract ancient secrets. But, I mean, is it really just academic curiosity, or is it terminal hubris?
I would argue it is the purest form of hubris masquerading as academic curiosity.
Seriously.
Bomanz represents the archetype of the scholar who severs knowledge from wisdom. He assumes that because he has the intellect to comprehend the locks, he has the fortitude to control what is inside the cage.
Wow.
He
Yes.
views the lady and the Dominator not as apocalyptic threats, but as a complex cipher waiting to be cracked.
And it's so ironic. He's literally mapping the graves of demigods, balancing world-ending necromancy, but his immediate stress comes from his wife nagging him about the price of meat.
That mundane grounding blinds him to the existential scale of the fire he is playing with. He fundamentally believes his own intellect can shield him from the consequences. He's risking his life, his son Stansel's future, the safety of the world, purely for intellectual triumph.
And he operates with such brazen audacity because the institutions designed to keep the past buried are failing. The zookeepers abandoned their posts centuries ago.
Which brings us to the Eternal Guard. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a devastating critique of institutional decay.
Let's talk about the Guard. They were established with one job, right?
A singular, terrifying mandate:
Yeah.
garrison the Barrowland and prevent the resurrectionists from waking the Dominator.
But 400 years of nothing happening breeds bureaucracy, not vigilance.
4 centuries is an eternity for a military bureaucracy.
Yeah.
An institution cannot sustain a state of high alert for that long when the primary catastrophe never occurs.
Yeah, the theoretical threat of a sleeping dark god just gets eclipsed by localized concerns.
Funding, quartermaster disputes, securing comfortable postings for the nobility.
We see this decay perfectly encapsulated in Monitor Besand.
Besand is fascinating. He's an incredibly harsh, sadistically zealous commander. He makes Bomanz's life miserable.
But the tragic irony is that Besand is the absolute last true believer. He is the only man in the Guard who still understands that the dirt they are watching contains actual monsters.
And his vigilance becomes a political liability.
Precisely because his vigilance forces the institution to acknowledge an inconvenient reality. And this collision comes to a head during the return of the Great Comet.
The year is the comet.
Tell me about this, because the celestial mechanics here are crucial.
Right, so the return of the Great Comet, which is the same comet that burned during the Dominator's fall, causes a massive surge in latent magical energy.
And the physical manifestation of this surge is undeniable. The ghosts of the Barrowland literally physically rise from the earth.
They patrol the perimeter, howling and screaming at the barracks.
Okay, this is the part that always stuns me, and I have to push back on the Guard's incompetence here. If everyone knows the comet returns every few decades, and if the ghosts are visibly rising from the dirt, screaming at the barracks, how can the Guard treat it like a myth? How does the new commander, the Jackal,
Who is just a corrupt noble's nephew, sent into exile, mind you.
right, how does he look out his window at a literal undead army and dismiss it?
It requires a profound, almost aggressive form of institutional gaslighting. It's often called normalcy bias.
Normacy bias.
Yeah. When an institution's culture has predetermined that the threat is a myth, even empirical evidence is rationalized to fit the paradigm. The Jackal and his superiors likely classify the ghosts as just a natural atmospheric phenomenon.
Just a spooky side effect of the comet.
Exactly. Rather than an active military threat. Because acknowledging the ghosts as a genuine perimeter breach would require mobilizing armies, expanding the budget, admitting the ancient evil is real.
It's easier, politically and psychologically, to simply lock the barracks doors and pretend the screaming outside is just the wind.
And that bureaucratic cowardice gets Besand killed.
It does. Besand is forcefully retired, stripped of his rank, so a corrupt noble can take his job.
But when that petty thief, Men Fu, tries to break into the Barrowland using a stolen amulet.
Besand is the only one who tries to stop him.
Right. He loses his protective charm in the struggle and is immediately swarmed and brutally killed by the ghosts.
The only man holding the line dies in the mud, while the new leadership cowers in their rooms.
But the true catastrophic failure of the Guard is revealed shortly after, when we jump to a later letter about Corby.
Corby the janitor.
Yes, Corby is this old, limping, seemingly insignificant cleaner working for the Guard. But he finds Bomanz's hidden silk map inside a wall.
And Corby possesses just enough magical aptitude, combined with Bomanz's stolen keys, to attempt something unthinkable.
Astral projection directly into the Great Barrow.
The mechanics of this sequence are just chilling. We aren't just talking about a ghost walking through walls.
No, in Cook's universe, the astral plane is a very specific, dangerous layer of reality.
Yeah.
Corby separates his spirit from his physical body.
He uses the map to navigate the spiritual defenses. He bypasses the ghost soldiers. He encounters the sleeping dragon, but realizes the dragon is a physical guardian.
It can sense his spiritual presence, but it can't consume an astral form. So he just slips past its jaws and enters the central crypt.
And what he finds inside, I mean, it completely shatters the foundational myth of the Eternal Guard.
The institution's entire existence is predicated on the belief that the Dominator is in an unbreakable magical coma.
Right.
But when Corby's astral form enters the crypt, he sees the lady in stasis, yes, but the Dominator. He sits up.
He is awake.
He is conscious. And he smiles at Corby.
Ugh, the most wicked, terrifying smile imaginable.
The shock is so profound it sends Corby fleeing back to his physical body in a sheer panic, leaving him in a permanent coma.
The Dominator isn't sleeping. He's awake, trapped in a box, just waiting for someone on the outside to turn the key.
And this historical revelation puts a massive ticking clock on the present-day narrative.
Because while the ancient evil secretly wakes in the Barrows in the past, the active evil of the Empire is closing in on the Black Company in the present day. Darling decides they can't just hide anymore, they must strike.
Right. Croaker learns that the limber, an ancient taken that Croaker thought he had personally killed, is back.
Back and commanding an army at rest.
So Darling, recognizing that passive defense in the null zone will eventually fail against an army of that size, alters the strategic calculus. They execute a preemptive raid.
And this leads to the raid on Rest, which completely deconstructs the traditional fantasy battle.
Oh, absolutely.
There are no glorious cavalry charges or banners waving in the sun. It's the gritty reality of war. It's a masterclass in the friction of war and logistical insanity.
To bypass the Imperial lines and strike deep into Rust, they utilize the ecology of the plane. They actually managed to board a massive wind whale.
I mean, consider the tactical desperation required to view a wind whale as an organic transport plane.
They're essentially climbing onto the back of a biological horror to fly over the enemy. It's an unpredictable, foul-smelling beast covered in giant parasites.
And they have no steering mechanism, no control over its altitude or velocity.
They're just tethering themselves to an apex predator and praying its natural migratory drift takes them over the enemy encampment in the dead of night.
Airborne cavalry executed with Stone Age chaotic biology. And the raid itself is a complete disaster.
It perfectly captures the messy, confusing reality of combat. The protagonists are the good guys, but they fight dirty, they attack sleeping soldiers, they bicker, they screw up the plan.
The plan unravels instantly. Someone sets a fire too early, completely blowing their element of surprise.
The gates of the compound aren't secured. Imperial cavalry counterattacks and traps them inside the walls.
And the wind whale. The beast that was supposed to be their extraction vehicle gets spooked by the fire and the screaming and simply panics and abandons them deep behind enemy lines.
It strips away all romanticism. Cook illustrates that even when you're fighting for survival against an absolute evil, war is fundamentally a series of cascading logistical failures.
But this chaos serves as the crucible to reveal the true capabilities of Darling's forces, specifically Tracker and Toadkiller Dog.
This raises an important question about Darling's ruthlessness. She trades lives for time. She relies on chaotic, untamable forces.
Tracker is a brilliant enigma. Up to this point, he presents himself as a new recruit. A quiet, slightly slow, simple woodsman.
He just blends in.
And Toadkiller Dog is a mangy, lazy mutt that refuses to move unless you throw food at it. But when the Imperial cavalry traps them, the facade drops.
Toadkiller Dog leaps up and literally rips a man's throat out with terrifying speed.
And Tracker steps into the breach and shows impossible, preternatural skill. In the pitch black, amidst smoke and chaos, he demonstrates this insane accuracy with a bow,
suppressing the Imperial advance.
And when forced into melee, he kills multiple highly trained Imperial soldiers flawlessly, with a grace and brutality that suggests centuries of muscle memory.
He fights like a demigod.
Which makes me question his identity. His cover story is so inconsistent. I mean, earlier in the source material, Croaker observes Tracker casually reading a document written in ancient Telkur.
A dead language of the domination.
Right. That even Croaker, a master historian, struggles to translate. You don't learn Telkur chopping wood in the forest. What is his deal?
He is harboring a massive ancient identity. He is a weapon wearing a human suit.
But he never admits what he is.
He doesn't have to admit it, because Tracker's true nature is a mystery. But the Plane of Fear has a brutal, weather-based mechanism for ripping away disguises.
Yeah.
The Change Storm.
Okay, yes. Section 5. The Change Storm. This is one of the most conceptually terrifying elements in the text.
As the survivors Croaker, Goblin, One-Eye, Tracker, and the dog flee the disaster at rust on a secondary wind whale. They are caught in this magical squall.
And a change storm isn't just bad weather. It's not a hurricane. It is a localized, violent, ontological event.
It temporarily rewrites the physical laws of reality. The visual description is striking.
Silent, varicolored lightning filling the sky, creating a vacuum at its center.
When the storm boundary passes over an area, reality becomes intensely protean. It induces spontaneous, chaotic, morphological mutations to anything caught within its radius.
So, what does this all mean? We see the mantis flying nearby get hit by the storm, and they turn completely invisible,
revealing nothing but stark, glowing white skeletons still flapping their wings.
The very rocks on the ground begin to sprout limbs and crawl. It's pure chaos, and then the storm washes over the company.
This is where the storm transitions from an environmental hazard to a profound psychological unmasking. It seems to interact with the latent essence of the subject.
Like a magical blacklight being shined on the characters.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because Goblin, the company wizard, is hit. His head swells to 10 times its normal size, and his body appears inside out.
A grotesque exaggeration of his internal state. A wizard dominated by his ego and intellect.
But the truly revealing transformations belong to Tracker and his dog. The supposedly simple woodsman undergoes a hideous metamorphosis.
He warps into a massive, demonic, ape-like monstrosity. The disguise completely melts away.
And Toad Killer Dog swells to the size of a war elephant. It sprouts massive fangs, and Croaker notes that the dog looks at him with eyes full of starved, ancient lust.
It isn't a dog. It is a predator wearing a canine shape.
Suddenly, the quiet new guy and his lazy dog are revealed to be the most terrifying, dangerous entities in the room. And once the storm passes, they revert to normal.
But the psychological damage is done. The change storm acts as a literal and metaphorical unmasking. It strips away the polite fictions to reveal the underlying truth.
Now, I want to speculate on something here. Look at Croaker in one eye. During the storm, Croaker just feels incredibly nervous and slightly nauseous.
One eye just swells up a little bit.
They don't turn into monsters. Why? Because they are fundamentally honest about who they are. They are who they appear to be.
That is a highly persuasive reading.
Croaker is exactly what he appears to be. A tired doctor. One eye is an old, slightly incompetent wizard. They have no hidden monstrous depths. The storm proves Tracker is clearly hiding a massive magical secret.
It's an unmasking of the present truth, not a prophecy. And this theme of unmasking hidden truths perfectly parallels the climax of the letters Croaker is reading.
Yes. We return to the climax of Bomanz's story. Bomanz finally attempting to unmask the lady.
The ultimate unmasking. We jump back to the culmination of his life's work. Bomanz completes his astral projection.
His physical body is safely hidden, watched over by his son Stancil, who is burning herbs. Bomanz's spirit travels the path he's calculated.
He navigates the spiritual architecture flawlessly. He slips past the dragon and the ghost soldiers. He breaches the central crypt.
And he finds the Dominator and the lady in stasis, wrapped in crackling, binding forces. And then the lady speaks to him.
Not audibly, but directly into his mind. And the terrifying aspect of this encounter is her demeanor. She is not asleep.
She is deeply amused by him. She says, "Welcome, we have waited a long time, haven't we?" She's been acutely aware of his probing for years.
She expects the traditional dynamic. She assumes he's a resurrectionist who wants to bargain for power or wealth in her future empire.
But Bomanz refuses to bargain. He intends to compel her.
This is the convergence of Bomanz's cryptology and the physics of the magic system. He reveals that through his exhaustive archival research, breaking the most complex ciphers,
he has discovered her pre-domination true name, the name she was given at birth. We really need to analyze this magic system's reliance on true names.
In this universe, a true name is absolute power. It is the root code of a person's existence.
It's like having the root password to the universe's most dangerous supercomputer.
Exactly. Bomanz didn't try to brute force the firewall with a larger spell. He went deep into the archives to find the machine code, the root password.
Bomanz hacked the system using historical texts. Speaking a true name grants absolute, unmitigated control over the entity. He intends to speak the name, assume root access, and bind the lady to his will before she can even blink.
It is the ultimate intellectual triumph. He opens his mouth to speak the name, and the letter Croaker is reading abruptly cuts off right before the name is revealed.
It is the most infuriating narrative cutoff. The courier brought an incomplete stack.
But there's a hidden message. At the bottom of the final page, There are strange scratches.
Initially dismissed as damage, but Croaker and Darling realize they form finger speech.
A silent, tactical sign language. The anonymous author, likely Corby, states that to get the final installment of the story and the true name itself, Croaker must undertake a massive journey.
He must travel to the city of Ur and find a blacksmith named Sand.
It creates this beautiful, cyclical tension in the narrative. Bomanz had the name, but history swallowed him.
Croaker has the history, but must now retrace Bomanz's steps to find the name.
It is the passing of the baton across centuries to save the world.
Incredible. So as we wrap up, let's distill the key takeaways for the listener from all these sources. First, the source material shows us that the past is never truly dead.
The Dominator is awake in the dark.
Second, institutional complacency is deadly. The Eternal Guard failed because they forgot their purpose. 400 years of bureaucracy bred complacency.
And finally, ultimate power doesn't always come from a sword or a spell. Sometimes it comes from a dusty archive and a deciphered name.
Information is power, but seeking it carries profound risks. To connect this back to you, the listener, whether in business, relationships, or personal growth, be careful what metaphorical barrows you decide to dig up.
Unearthing the root truth of a situation might give you control, but it will forever change the landscape of your reality. You can't put the ghost back in the ground.
Exactly. Which leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to mull over on your own. If a change storm blew through your life right now, freezing time and violently stripping away your societal mask, what true shape would you take? Would you be the exact same person, or would something terrifyingly different be revealed?